The rope burned through Isaac Marlowe's calloused palms as he hauled the unconscious outlaw up the final stretch of rocky terrain. And all he could think about was the woman at the Silver Spur Saloon, whose dark eyes haunted his dreams every night he spent alone in these godforsaken mountains. The year was 1878, and Isaac had been tracking the Dawson brothers for 3 weeks through the Arizona wilderness, dragging them one by one back to Sierra Vista for the bounties that would finally give him enough money to do something he had never imagined himself doing, buying a woman's freedom from the man who owned her contract at the saloon. Not buying her like property, he told himself, but purchasing the papers that bound her to 5 more years of serving drinks to drunken miners and dodging their wandering hands. Buying her a chance at something better. Isaac was 32 years old, built like the mountains he called home, with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown elk and arms thick with muscle from years of swinging axes and wrestling wild game. His dark brown hair fell past his shoulders, usually tied back with a leather cord, and his face was weathered from sun and wind, but still handsome in a rugged way that made women in town look twice. He stood 6'4" in his worn boots, and when he walked into a room, people noticed. But for all his intimidating size and the reputation he had earned as a tracker and sometime bounty hunter, Isaac Marlowe was a gentle soul who preferred the company of hawks and deer to most people. The woman at the Silver Spur was different, though. Teresa Cortez had arrived in Sierra Vista 2 years ago, brought up from Mexico by a man named Gideon Rake, who ran the saloon and held the contracts of 3 women who worked there. Teresa was 26, with curves that would make a saint reconsider his vows and a face that belonged in one of those paintings Isaac had seen once in Santa Fe. She was plump in all the ways that made men stare, with full hips and a generous bosom that her corseted dresses emphasized. But it was her spirit that had caught Isaac's attention. She never let the men touch her beyond what was necessary to serve them drinks. She moved through that saloon like a queen among peasants, head high despite the circumstances that had brought her there. Isaac had first seen her 14 months ago when he came to town to sell furs. He had walked into the Silver Spur for a single whiskey, planning to leave within the hour. But Teresa had served him his drink, and their eyes had met, and something had shifted in his chest like a landslide. She had smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes, and said in accented English, "You are not like the others who come here." "How can you tell?" Isaac had asked, his voice rough from days of not speaking to anyone but his horse. "You look at my face, not my body. You see me." She had touched his hand briefly, just her fingertips against his knuckles, and then moved away to serve another customer. Isaac had returned to town every 2 weeks after that, always finding a reason to stop by the Silver Spur. He learned that Teresa had come north looking for work after her parents died, that she had been promised a job as a seamstress, but found herself trapped in a contract she could not read when she signed it. She owed Gideon Rake $1,200, an impossible sum for her passage, her room, her dresses, and various other expenses that kept accumulating. Without that money, she was bound to the saloon until the debt was paid, or until Rake decided to sell her contract to someone else. "I am 30 years old in 4 years," Teresa had told Isaac one evening when the saloon was quiet and Rake was passed out drunk in his office. "He says if I still owe money then, he will sell my contract to a brothel in Tombstone. That is what happens to the women who get too old for serving drinks." The rage that had filled Isaac at those words was like nothing he had ever felt. He was a peaceful man by nature. But the thought of Teresa being sent to a brothel made him want to tear Gideon Rake apart with his bare hands. Instead, he had done what he did best. He had gone into the mountains and started hunting men with prices on their heads. Now, 6 months later, Isaac was dragging in his 4th outlaw. The first had been worth $200, the second $300, the third $400. This one, Jake Dawson, was worth $500 alive. Added to the money Isaac had saved from trapping and fur trading, he would have exactly $1,230. Enough to pay Teresa's debt and have a little left over for supplies. The sun was setting as Isaac rode into Sierra Vista with Jake Dawson slung over the back of his pack horse. The town was typical for southern Arizona low adobe buildings, mixed with wooden structures, dusty streets, and the constant smell of horses and mesquite smoke. The sheriff's office sat at the north end of the main street, and Isaac guided his horses toward it, aware of the stares from townspeople who recognized him. He was known here as the Mountain Man, who came down from the Huachuca Mountains every few weeks, always polite, always quiet, never causing trouble. Nobody knew about his visits to the Silver Spur or his conversations with Teresa Cortez. Sheriff Tom Bradley came out onto the wooden walkway as Isaac dismounted. Bradley was in his 50s, weathered and competent, with gray in his mustache and sharp eyes that missed very little. Isaac Marlowe. That would be Jake Dawson, if I am not mistaken. It would be. Isaac untied the unconscious outlaw and lifted him like he weighed nothing, carrying him into the sheriff's office and dropping him into the cell Bradley had already opened. That is the 4th bounty you have brought in over the past 6 months, Bradley observed, locking the cell door. You getting into the bounty hunting business full time. Just need the money for something important. Isaac accepted the promissory note Bradley wrote out, which he would take to the bank in the morning to convert to cash. Jake's brother's still out there, but he headed toward New Mexico. He is someone else's problem now. Bradley nodded. You look like you could use a meal and a bed. Martha has stew on if you want to come by the house. I appreciate the offer, but I have business to take care of. Isaac tipped his hat and left the sheriff's office, leading his horses to the livery stable where old Hector took care of them with the efficiency of 40 years' experience. Isaac paid for their board, then walked through the darkening streets toward the Silver Spur Saloon, his heart pounding harder than it had when he was tracking armed outlaws. The saloon was busy when Isaac pushed through the doors. Piano music competed with loud voices and laughter, and the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. Isaac saw Teresa immediately. She was carrying a tray of drinks to a table of miners, her dark hair pinned up in an elaborate style that must have taken an hour to arrange. Her red dress cut low enough to make the miners stare, but not low enough to be truly improper. She moved with practiced grace, avoiding hands that reached for her waist, smiling without warmth. Then she saw Isaac and her face transformed. The professional mask fell away, and genuine happiness lit her features. She said something to the miners and made her way through the crowd toward him. And Isaac felt like he could breathe for the first time in 3 weeks. You are back, Teresa said, her voice warm with pleasure. I was beginning to worry that you had decided the mountains were better company than people. The mountains do not serve whiskey, Isaac replied, allowing himself a small smile. Is Rake here? Something shifted in Teresa's expression. He is in his office counting money. Why do you ask? I need to speak with him about your contract. Teresa's eyes widened and her hand flew to her throat. Isaac, what have you done? I have been collecting bounties. I have the money to pay your debt. The tray slipped from Teresa's hands and crashed to the floor, glasses shattering and whiskey splashing across the sawdust. The piano music stopped, and every eye in the saloon turned toward them. Teresa stood frozen, staring at Isaac like she could not believe what she was hearing. You what? She whispered. $1,200. I have it. I will have the cash tomorrow morning when the bank opens. But I have the promissory note now. Isaac pulled the paper from his pocket. I want to buy your freedom from Rake. Gideon Rake's office door slammed open, and the man himself emerged. Tall and thin with slicked back hair and a mustache waxed to sharp points. He wore a fancy suit that looked out of place in Sierra Vista, and his eyes were cold as snakes. "What is all this commotion? Teresa, clean up that mess and get back to work. She is not going anywhere until we discuss business," Isaac said, his voice calm but carrying the kind of authority that came from never having to prove himself through bluster. "I am here to pay off her contract." Rake looked Isaac up and down with obvious disdain. "You? A mountain man who smells like horse and leather wants to negotiate with me? Get out of my establishment before I have you thrown out. I have $1,200 that says you will listen to what I have to say." Isaac held up the promissory note. "That is the amount Teresa owes you according to her contract. I am prepared to pay it in full tomorrow morning." The saloon had gone completely silent now. Even the drunk cowboys at the bar were watching with interest. Rake's expression shifted from disdain to calculation. He looked at Teresa, who had tears streaming down her face, then back at Isaac. "Her contract is not for sale," Rake said flatly. "Every contract is for sale for the right price," Isaac countered. "You are a businessman. $1,200 in cash, all at once. No more waiting for Teresa to work off pennies at a time. You could hire another girl for half that amount. Teresa's worth more than $1,200 to me. She is the most popular girl in this saloon. Men come from 3 towns over just to look at her." Rake crossed his arms. "If you want her contract, the price is $3,000. The number hit Isaac like a physical blow. $3,000 was an impossible sum. It would take him years to save that much, even with bounty hunting. He saw Teresa's face crumple with despair and felt his own hopes die in his chest. "You cannot do that," Teresa said, her voice shaking with anger. "My contract says $1,200. You cannot just change the amount." "I can refuse to sell, which is exactly what I am doing. Your contract says you owe me $1,200, which you will work off in the normal course of business. It does not say anything about allowing a third party to purchase your freedom." Rake smiled unpleasantly. "Now get back to work before I dock your pay for the broken glasses." Isaac's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice steady. "Let me see the contract." "Why would I do that?" "Because if you do not, I will go to the territorial judge and file a complaint about fraudulent contracts. I am betting that contract of yours would not hold up to much scrutiny if a lawyer looked at it closely." Isaac had no idea if this was true, but he had heard enough stories about men like Rake to know they usually operated in gray areas of the law. Rake's expression darkened, but he jerked his head toward his office. "Fine. Come look at the damned contract. But it will not change anything." Isaac followed Rake into the cramped office, with Teresa close behind. Rake pulled a metal box from under his desk, unlocked it, and withdrew a sheaf of papers. He tossed them onto the desk. "There. Read it yourself if you can read." The contract was written in English and dense legal language that was clearly designed to be confusing. Isaac read through it slowly, his jaw tightening with each paragraph. The document was even worse than he had imagined. Teresa did not just owe money for her passage, she was charged for every meal, every piece of clothing, even the soap she used to wash. The interest on the debt was calculated at 15% per year, which meant that even if she paid off the principal, the interest would keep accumulating. It was designed to keep her in debt forever. But there was one paragraph that caught Isaac's attention. It stated that the contract could be dissolved if Teresa married, as a husband would assume responsibility for her debts or could negotiate new terms. It was probably meant to discourage men from proposing to Rake's girls without paying him first, but it was a loophole nonetheless. "Marry me," Isaac said, Turning to Teresa, she stared at him. What? Marry me. The contract says it is dissolved if you marry. We get married, and Rake has no more hold on you. That is not how it works, Rake snarled. If she marries, her husband assumes her debts. You would still owe me $1,200 plus interest, which I am offering to pay. But once we are married, we can negotiate new terms. And I am guessing that a judge would look more favorably on a woman's husband disputing fraudulent charges than on a woman who is bound by contract to the man making the charges. Isaac looked at Teresa, his heart in his throat. I know this is not romantic. I know we barely know each other. But I have $1,200 that will at least pay the base amount you owe. And I will work to pay off the rest. You will be free of this place. You can come live in the mountains with me, or I will build us a house in town, whatever you want. I will never hurt you or force you to do anything you do not want to do. I am just offering you a way out. Teresa's eyes were huge and dark in the lamplight. She looked at the contract, then at Rake, then back at Isaac. When she spoke, her voice was steady. Yes, I will marry you. This is ridiculous, Rake spat. You cannot just, I can and I will. Teresa lifted her chin in that proud way Isaac had always admired. The contract says I can marry. It does not say I need your permission. Isaac is right that a judge would look at these charges and see they are unfair. You can take the $1,200 and let me go cleanly, or you can fight us in court and probably lose everything, including your reputation. Every person in this saloon heard you try to change the terms of our agreement. They heard you demand $3,000 for a contract that says $1,200. How many other girls have you cheated this way? How many other families want their daughters back? Rake's face turned an ugly shade of red. For a moment, Isaac thought the man might become violent, and he shifted his weight, ready to put himself between Rake and Teresa if necessary. But Rake was a businessman, not a fighter. After a long, tense moment, he grabbed a pen and scrawled something on a piece of paper. Fine. $1,200 cash, paid to me by noon tomorrow, and I will sign off on her contract being fulfilled. But you marry her first. I want to see a marriage certificate before I take your money, because otherwise she is still bound to me, and I will have the sheriff arrest her for breach of contract if she tries to leave. Rake shoved the paper across the desk. That is a promissory note for what you owe me. If I do not have the cash by noon tomorrow, the amount doubles. Isaac took the note and folded it carefully, then offered his hand to Teresa. She placed her small hand in his large, calloused one, and he felt a jolt of something electric pass between them. We need to find someone to marry us tonight. Father Diego will do it, Teresa said. He knows me. He will believe this is real. They left the Silver Spur together. Stepping out into the cool night air, Isaac could feel Teresa trembling. Whether from shock or fear or excitement, he could not tell. They walked in silence to the small Catholic church at the edge of town, and Isaac knocked on the door of the adjacent rectory until a small gray-haired priest opened it. Blinking sleepily, Teresa? What is wrong, child? Father Diego, I need you to marry me to this man tonight. His name is Isaac Marlowe, and he is a good man, and he is helping me escape Gideon Rake. The words tumbled out of Teresa in a rush of Spanish-accented English. Please, Father. I know this seems sudden, but it is my only chance to be free. Father Diego looked at Isaac with sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. You understand that marriage is a sacred bond? This is not something to be done lightly just to break a contract. I understand, Isaac said quietly. I have been in love with Teresa for more than a year. I was saving money to buy her freedom because I could not stand to see her trapped. This is not just about the contract. I want to marry her, to take care of her, to build a life with her. I am just doing it faster than I planned." Something in Isaac's face or voice must have convinced the priest, because Father Diego nodded slowly. "Come inside. I will need 2 witnesses. I will wake my housekeeper and send for someone else." The ceremony that followed felt like a dream to Isaac. Father Diego performed the rites in both English and Spanish, while the sleepy housekeeper and a neighbor who had been pulled from his bed stood as witnesses. Isaac did not have a ring, so he took a thin strip of leather from his pocket and tied it around Teresa's finger, promising to replace it with gold when he could. Teresa spoke her vows in a clear, strong voice, and when Father Diego pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her gently. Just a soft press of lips that promised more than it demanded. They signed the marriage certificate, and Father Diego provided them with 2 copies, one for them and one for the church records. "Go with God," the priest said, pressing Teresa's hands between his. "You have my prayers for a happy life together." Isaac and Teresa walked out into the night as husband and wife. They had nowhere to go. Isaac usually slept rough when he was in town, and Teresa's small room was in the saloon. They ended up at the boarding house on the edge of town, where Mrs. Chen rented them her best room without asking questions beyond congratulations on their marriage. Once they were alone in the small but clean room, the reality of what they had done seemed to hit them both. They stood on opposite sides of the bed, suddenly awkward with each other. Teresa twisted the leather strip on her finger, not meeting Isaac's eyes. "I will sleep on the floor," Isaac said quietly. "I meant what I said. I will not force you into anything. We are married legally, but we can take our time with everything else." Teresa looked up at him then, her dark eyes shining with tears. "You really did all of this for me? You spent 6 months hunting dangerous men just to collect enough money to buy my freedom. I would have spent 6 years if that is what it took. But why? You hardly know me. We have had maybe 20 conversations, and half of those were while I was serving drinks in a crowded saloon." Isaac sat down on the edge of the bed, careful to keep distance between them. "I know you are kind, because I have watched you help the other girls when Rake is not looking. I know you are brave because you stand up to drunks twice your size without flinching. I know you are smart because I have heard you quote poetry in 3 languages. I know you are loyal because you send money back to your sister in Mexico even though you barely have enough for yourself. I know all the important things about you, Teresa. The rest we can learn together." She let out a shaky breath and sat down on the other side of the bed. "I do not love you yet. I know. But I think I could love you. You are a good man, Isaac Marlowe. Better than any man I have met in this country." She reached across the bed and took his hand. "Thank you for saving me. You are my wife now. We save each other." Isaac squeezed her hand gently. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we deal with Rake, and then we figure out what comes next." Teresa nodded and stood up, beginning to unpin her elaborate hair. Isaac turned away to give her privacy, removing his boots and gun belt, but keeping his shirt and trousers on. He heard the rustle of fabric as Teresa undressed and redressed in her shift, then the creak of the mattress as she climbed into bed. Isaac lay down on the floor with his coat as a pillow, but within minutes, Teresa's voice came from above him. "Isaac, this is foolish. The bed is big enough for both of us, and you are too large to sleep on the floor. Come up here. I trust you." Isaac hesitated, then stood and climbed carefully into bed, staying on the far edge. Teresa stayed on her side as well, but she reached out and took his hand, holding it between them in the darkness. "My real name is Teresa Maria Cortez," she whispered. "I am 26 years old. I was born in Hermosillo. My father was a saddle maker and my mother made lace. They died of fever when I was 23, and I came north because there was nothing left for me there except poverty and a man who wanted to marry me even though he already had a wife. I wanted a better life. I wanted to work and make something of myself. Instead, I ended up trapped in that saloon, and every day I felt my dreams getting smaller and smaller. "What do you dream of?" Isaac asked. "I want a home, a real home with a garden and chickens and maybe a goat. I want to make my own clothes and cook my own food. I want children someday, if God wills it. I want to wake up in the morning and know that the day is mine, that nobody owns me or controls me." She turned to look at him in the darkness. "What do you dream of?" "The same things, I guess. I have been alone for a long time, Teresa. I grew up in Kentucky, but my parents died when I was 15, and I headed west because there was nothing to keep me there. I have been wandering ever since, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I built a cabin in the Huachuca Mountains 5 years ago, and that is the closest I have come to a real home. But a cabin is not a home without someone to share it with." "Tell me about your cabin." Isaac described the small, sturdy structure he had built in a valley surrounded by pine trees, with a stream nearby that ran year-round and meadows where deer came to graze at dawn. He told her about the way the mountains looked when snow capped them in winter, and how the summer storms rolled in with thunder that echoed between the peaks. He told her about the hawks that nested in the cliff face and the family of foxes that lived in the rocks behind the cabin. As he spoke, he felt Teresa relax beside him, her breathing growing slower and deeper until she fell asleep still holding his hand. Isaac lay awake long into the night, marveling at the turn his life had taken. 24 hours ago, he had been alone in the wilderness, tracking an outlaw. Now he was married to the woman he loved, lying beside her in a borrowed bed, responsible for her safety and happiness. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. Morning came too quickly. Isaac woke to find Teresa already up and dressed, braiding her hair in front of the small mirror. She wore the same red dress from the night before, and Isaac realized she probably did not own any other clothes except for her saloon dresses. "We need to get you some proper dresses," he said, sitting up and running a hand through his tangled hair. "Pants too, if you want them. The mountains are not a place for fancy skirts." Teresa turned and smiled at him. "First, we deal with rake. Then we worry about clothes." They ate breakfast at the boarding house, eggs and bread and coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of the burnt mud served at the saloon. Then they walked together to the bank, where Isaac presented his promissory note and collected $1,200 in cash. The weight of the money in his pocket made him nervous, but he kept his hand on the pistol at his hip, aware that carrying that much cash made him a target for anyone desperate enough to try. The Silver Spur was nearly empty when they arrived at 11 o'clock in the morning. A few dedicated drunks hunched over the bar, and one of the other saloon girls was sweeping sawdust from the previous night's revelries. She looked up when Teresa and Isaac entered, her eyes widening. "Teresa, Rake has been in a fury all morning. He is threatening to have you arrested for breach of contract." "He cannot do that. I am married now." Teresa held up her hand to show the marriage certificate they had brought. "Where is he?" "In his office. But Teresa, be careful. He has been drinking and he has his gun out." Isaac put himself in front of Teresa and walked to Rake's office door, knocking once before pushing it open. Gideon Rake sat behind his desk with a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a pistol in the other. He looked like he had not slept, his fancy clothes rumpled and his eyes bloodshot. "So you actually went through with it," Rake said, his words slightly slurred. You married this mountain ape. I did. Here is the marriage certificate. Teresa placed the paper on the desk. And Isaac has your money. $1,200 as agreed. Isaac pulled the cash from his pocket and set it on the desk in neat stacks. Count it if you want. It is all there. Rake stared at the money for a long moment, then set down his pistol and picked up one of the stacks, thumbing through the bills. He counted every dollar twice, and Isaac could see the man's mind working, trying to find some way to cheat them or back out of the deal. But there was no angle left to play. The money was there, the marriage was legal, and half the town knew about their agreement. Fine, Rake finally said. He pulled out Teresa's contract and scrawled across it in large letters. Paid in full. Then he signed and dated it. Take it and get out. Both of you. And Teresa, if you ever come back to this saloon, I will have you thrown out on your ass. I have no intention of ever returning, Teresa said coldly. She took the contract and folded it carefully. Goodbye, Mr. Rake. I hope I never see you again. They left the Silver Spur for the last time, stepping out into the bright Arizona sunshine. Teresa was shaking, clutching the paid contract like it was the most precious thing in the world. Isaac wanted to take her in his arms, but restrained himself, aware of the eyes watching them from doorways and windows. I need to get my things from my room, Teresa said. It will not take long. I do not have much. Isaac waited outside while Teresa went back into the saloon one last time. She emerged 15 minutes later with a small canvas bag that held everything she owned, a few pieces of clothing, a brush, a small wooden box that she did not explain. It was heartbreaking how little she had accumulated in 2 years. Now what? Teresa asked. Now we buy you some proper clothes and supplies. And then we decide whether you want to go to my cabin in the mountains or if I should build us a house here in town. Isaac offered her his arm, and she took it. And they walked together down the main street of Sierra Vista as a married couple. At the general store, Isaac bought Teresa 2 practical cotton dresses, a pair of sturdy boots, a warm coat, and some men's work trousers that could be altered to fit her. Teresa protested the expense, but Isaac waved away her concerns. He also bought supplies for the cabin: flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, salt pork, ammunition. The storekeeper, a friendly woman named Mrs. Patterson, congratulated them on their marriage and threw in some fabric for making curtains as a wedding gift. By the time they finished shopping, it was early afternoon, and Isaac had spent most of the $30 he had left over after paying Rake. But seeing Teresa's face as she clutched her new clothes made it worth every penny. So? Isaac asked as they loaded the supplies onto his horses at the livery. Mountains or town? Teresa looked around at Sierra Vista, at the dusty streets and crowded buildings, then looked at Isaac. I have spent 2 years surrounded by people and noise. I want to see your mountains. I want to see the place you call home. Relief and joy flooded through Isaac. It is a hard life up there, isolated. The winters are cold and the closest neighbor is 10 miles away. But I will keep you safe and warm. I promise you that. I believe you. Teresa smiled at him, the first truly happy smile he had seen from her. When do we leave? Right now, if you're ready. We can make it to the cabin by nightfall if we leave in the next hour. They made their final preparations quickly. Isaac traded some furs he had stored at the livery for a sturdy mule to carry their supplies. He also bought a gentle mare for Teresa to ride, a pretty dappled gray that nickered softly when Teresa stroked her nose. Teresa changed into one of her new dresses and the practical boots, and Isaac helped her onto the mare, making sure she was comfortable in the saddle. They left Sierra Vista in the mid-afternoon sun, heading north toward the Huachuca Mountains. Isaac led the way on his big bay gelding, with Teresa following on her mare and the pack mule tied behind. The desert landscape gradually gave way to grassland, and then to rolling hills dotted with juniper and oak. The temperature dropped as they climbed in elevation, and the air smelled of pine and wild sage. Teresa rode well, sitting straight in the saddle and keeping pace without complaint. Isaac found himself glancing back at her frequently, still hardly believing that she was real, that she was his wife, that she was coming home with him. Every time he looked, she was staring around at the landscape with wonder on her face, drinking in the open space and the wild beauty. They stopped once to rest the horses and eat some jerky and biscuits Isaac had bought at the store. Teresa sat on a flat rock and looked out over the valley below, where Sierra Vista was just a small cluster of buildings in the distance. "I can see why you love it here," she said quietly. "It is so big, so much space, so much sky. In Mexico, my village was small, but it was crowded. Here it feels like you could breathe all the way to your toes." "Wait until you see the cabin," Isaac said. "It is even better." They pressed on as the afternoon waned, climbing higher into the mountains on a trail that only Isaac knew. The pines grew thicker and the air grew cooler, and by the time the sun was setting, they reached a meadow with a small log cabin nestled at one edge. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, and Isaac realized that the fire he had left banked before he left 3 weeks ago must have somehow survived. No, that was impossible. Someone had been here. Isaac held up a hand to stop Teresa and dismounted quietly, drawing his rifle from its saddle holster. He approached the cabin cautiously, every sense alert. Then the door opened, and a familiar voice called out, "Took you long enough, Isaac. I have been eating your supplies for 2 days, waiting for you to get back." A man stepped out of the cabin, tall and lean with sandy hair and a crooked smile. Isaac relaxed and lowered his rifle. "Daniel Morgan, you thieving bastard. What are you doing in my house?" "Hiding from some angry brothers of a man I brought in for bounty. Figured your place was as good as any to lay low for a few days." Daniel's eyes moved past Isaac to Teresa, and his eyebrows rose. "Well now, this is unexpected. Isaac Marlowe brings a woman to his mountain hermitage. Is the world ending? This is my wife, Teresa." Isaac turned to help Teresa dismount, keeping himself between her and Daniel out of instinct. "Teresa, this is Daniel Morgan. He is a friend and also a bounty hunter. He is harmless despite the way he talks." "Your wife?" Daniel's grin widened. "Isaac, you old dog. How did you manage that? And such a beautiful woman, too." He swept off his hat and bowed to Teresa. "Madam, it is a pleasure to meet you. I apologize for intruding on what should be your first night in your new home. I will clear out immediately." "You do not have to leave on my account," Teresa said, her English careful and polite. "If you are friends with Isaac, then you are welcome to stay for a meal before you go. See, Isaac, your wife has better manners than you do." Daniel helped Isaac carry the supplies into the cabin, keeping up a running stream of cheerful chatter that helped ease the awkwardness of the situation. The cabin was small but well built, just one large room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy bed that Isaac had built himself, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves holding books and supplies. Daniel had clearly been making himself comfortable. There were dirty dishes on the table, and his bedroll was spread on the floor. But he set about cleaning up immediately, washing the dishes and rolling up his bedding. Isaac started preparing dinner while Teresa explored her new home, running her fingers over the smooth wood of the table, examining the books on the shelves, touching the curtainless windows. She moved slowly, taking everything in, and Isaac wished he knew what she was thinking. Daniel kept up conversation during dinner, telling exaggerated stories about his recent bounties and asking Teresa about Mexico in a way that was friendly rather than intrusive. Despite Isaac's initial annoyance at finding someone in his cabin, he was grateful for Daniel's presence. It made the evening less awkward, less intense. They ate venison stew that Isaac prepared from dried meat, along with fresh biscuits that Teresa made with a competence that spoke of years of cooking. After dinner, Daniel announced he would sleep in the small lean-to behind the cabin, where Isaac stored wood. "Give you two some privacy on your first night home," he said with a wink that made Teresa blush and Isaac roll his eyes. Once they were alone, the awkwardness returned. Isaac banked the fire for the night while Teresa stood by the window, looking out at the stars that filled the sky in a way they never did in town. "It is beautiful here," she said softly. "Thank you for bringing me to your home, our home." "There is only one bed," Isaac said, stating the obvious. "I can sleep on the floor again if you want." Teresa turned to face him, and in the firelight, she looked like something out of a painting, her dark hair loose around her shoulders and her curves outlined by her simple dress. "We are married, Isaac. I know we married quickly and for practical reasons. But we are still married. I do not want you to sleep on the floor. Come to bed with me." Isaac's mouth went dry. "Teresa, I do not want to rush you. I meant what I said about taking time." "I know, and I appreciate that more than you know." She crossed the small space between them and took his hands in hers. "But I also know that you are an honorable man, that you will be gentle with me, and that I am safe with you. I am not afraid of you, Isaac. I am only afraid of wasting time, of holding back when life is so short and uncertain." She reached up and touched his face, her small hand soft against his bearded jaw. Isaac closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, overwhelmed by the sweetness of it. When he opened his eyes again, Teresa was smiling at him with a mixture of tenderness and nervousness. "I do not love you yet," she repeated her words from the night before. "But I want to. Will you help me learn to love you?" Isaac answered by kissing her, really kissing her this time. Not the gentle press of lips from their wedding ceremony, but a real kiss that communicated everything he had been feeling for the past 14 months. Teresa made a small sound of surprise and then melted against him, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. She was soft and warm, and she smelled like soap and sage, and Isaac had to remind himself to be gentle, to not overwhelm her with the intensity of what he was feeling. They broke apart eventually, both breathing hard. Teresa's cheeks were flushed and her eyes were bright. "That was nice," she whispered. "Do it again." Isaac laughed, a real laugh that came from deep in his chest, and kissed her again. They made their way to the bed without quite knowing how they got there, kissing and touching and learning each other in the ways that mattered. Isaac was exquisitely careful with Teresa, always checking to make sure she was comfortable, always ready to stop if she seemed uncertain. But Teresa showed no uncertainty. She was eager and curious and generous, and when they finally came together as husband and wife in the fullest sense, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Teresa's head resting on Isaac's broad chest and his arms wrapped around her protectively. The cabin was quiet, except for the crackling of the fire and the distant call of an owl outside. "I think I am starting to fall in love with you," Teresa murmured sleepily. "Is that too soon to say?" "No," Isaac said, kissing the top of her head. "It is not too soon at all." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Isaac slept more peacefully than he had in years. Morning brought the realities of their new life together. Daniel was already up and had coffee brewing when Isaac and Teresa emerged from the cabin, both rumpled and happy in a way that made Daniel grin knowingly. "Congratulations on your marriage," he said dryly. "I will be leaving now and taking my indelicate presents with me. Isaac, thank you for the shelter. Mrs. Marlowe, it was a pleasure meeting you. I hope we will meet again under less intrusive circumstances." "Travel safely," Teresa said, and she meant it. Daniel had been kind in his own rough way, making jokes that eased tension and then knowing when to make himself scarce. After Daniel rode off, Isaac and Teresa spent the day settling in together. Isaac showed Teresa how to work the water pump he had built that brought water from the nearby stream. He taught her how to split kindling and where he kept his traps and hunting gear. Teresa explored the meadow around the cabin, exclaiming over wildflowers and finding a patch of wild herbs that would be useful for cooking. They worked side by side to improve the cabin, hanging the curtains Mrs. Patterson had given them, building shelves for Teresa's few possessions, rearranging furniture to make the space feel more like a home. Isaac was struck by how natural it felt to have Teresa there, how her presence transformed the cabin from a shelter into a real home. She sang while she worked, old Spanish songs that made the space feel warm and alive. As the days turned into weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Isaac hunted and trapped, providing meat and furs. Teresa cooked and tended a small garden she planted near the cabin, coaxing vegetables from the rocky mountain soil. They worked together to gather wood for winter, to repair the roof where it leaked, to build a small chicken coop for the hens Isaac bought on his next trip to town. They talked for hours every evening, sitting by the fire and sharing stories from their pasts. Isaac learned that Teresa had always wanted to be a teacher, that she loved to read and had taught herself English from a tattered grammar book. Teresa learned that Isaac had a dry sense of humor hidden beneath his quiet exterior, and that he was surprisingly well-read for a man who lived alone in the mountains. They discovered shared loves of thunderstorms and stargazing, of spicy food and strong coffee. They also learned each other's bodies with the enthusiasm of newlyweds. Isaac was endlessly fascinated by Teresa's curves, by the soft plumpness of her belly and thighs, by the way she moved and sighed and gasped when he touched her in certain ways. Teresa seemed equally fascinated by Isaac's strength, by the hard muscles of his arms and chest, by the gentleness with which such a large man could touch her. "I never imagined it could be like this," Teresa told him one night as they lay in bed, both satisfied and drowsy. The girls at the saloon, they always talked about men as if they were something to be endured. But this with you, it is not enduring, it is enjoying. "That is how it should be," Isaac said, trailing his fingers up and down her spine. "Pleasure for both, not just the man." As summer deepened into fall, they made occasional trips to Sierra Vista for supplies. People in town had heard about their marriage, and most seemed genuinely happy for them. Sheriff Bradley always made a point to chat with them, and Mrs. Patterson at the general store always had a kind word. Only Gideon Rake glared at them from the doorway of the Silver Spur, but he never approached or caused trouble. On one of these trips, Isaac noticed Teresa looking longingly at the small schoolhouse where children gathered for lessons. "You should talk to the school teacher," he said. "Miss Anderson is getting older and could probably use help. You said you always wanted to teach. But I do not have proper training, and my English, it is not perfect. Your English is better than half the people in this town, and you are smarter than anyone I have ever met. At least ask." Teresa did ask, and Miss Anderson was delighted to have an assistant, especially one who could help the Mexican children in town who struggled with English. Within a month, Teresa was teaching 3 days a week, riding down from the mountains on her dappled mare and staying overnight with Mrs. Patterson before returning to the cabin. Isaac missed her on those nights she was gone, but he was proud of her for pursuing something that made her happy. Winter came early to the Huachuca Mountains that year. The first snow fell in October, dusting the meadow white and making the cabin look like something from a Christmas picture. Isaac had prepared well, with cords of wood stacked under the lean-to and the cabin chinked tight against drafts. They had dried meat and preserved vegetables, flour and sugar and coffee. They would not go hungry. But the isolation of a mountain winter was something Teresa had not experienced before. By November, the snow was deep enough that traveling to town became difficult. They were snowed in for days at a time, with only each other for company. Isaac worried that Teresa would become bored or lonely, but she seemed to thrive in the quiet. She read every book Isaac owned, and then started reading them again. She sewed new clothes for both of them and made rag rugs to cover the cold floor. She experimented with recipes, creating fusion dishes that combined Mexican flavors with frontier staples. And they talked. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Isaac told Teresa about the loneliness of his wandering years, about how he had almost given up on ever finding someone to share his life with. Teresa told Isaac about her grief over losing her parents, about the desperation that had driven her to accept Gideon Rake's false promises. "I was so foolish," she said one snowy evening as they huddled close to the fire. "I should have known something was wrong when he would not let me read the contract carefully. But I was desperate, and I wanted to believe that good fortune had finally found me. You were not foolish. You were hopeful. There is a difference." Isaac pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. "And, in a way, good fortune did find you. It just took a detour through hell first. And then you came and pulled me out." Teresa twisted to look up at him. "My mountain man hero. I am no hero. I just could not stand seeing you trapped there." "That is what makes you a hero," Teresa said firmly. She kissed him, long and deep, and soon they were making love on the rug in front of the fire, the winter cold forgotten in the heat of their passion. It was during that long winter, isolated from the world, that they truly fell in love. Not the initial attraction that had drawn them together, but the deep, enduring love that comes from truly knowing another person. They learned each other's habits and quirks. They had their first real argument about whether to get a dog in the spring and learned how to fight fair and make up properly. They laughed together over silly things and supported each other through hard days. By the time spring began to melt the snow, Teresa knew she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not wanted to say anything until she was certain. When she finally told Isaac, he went very still, and then picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby. Yes, in late summer, I think. Are you happy?" "Happy? Teresa, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once." He set her down carefully, as if she might break. "We need to prepare. We need a cradle and baby clothes, and we should bring in a midwife from town when it is time. Maybe you should stay in town for the last few months, somewhere close to the doctor." "Isaac, women have been having babies for thousands of years. I will be fine. And I want our baby to be born here, in our home." She took his face in her hands. "But yes, we need a cradle, and you are going to be a wonderful father." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Teresa continued teaching in town through the spring, though she stopped making the trip once her belly grew large enough to make riding uncomfortable. Instead, Miss Anderson brought lessons and books to the cabin, making the journey once a week to keep Teresa's mind engaged. Isaac was attentive to the point of being comical. He barely let Teresa lift anything heavy. He made sure she ate well and rested often. He talked to her belly every night, telling their baby stories about the mountains and promising to teach the child how to track and hunt and survive in the wilderness. "What if it is a girl?" Teresa asked one evening, amused by Isaac's plans for teaching their child to shoot. "Then she will be the best shot in Arizona territory," Isaac said firmly. "Boy or girl, our children will know how to take care of themselves." Their son was born on a warm August evening in 1879, with Mrs. Chen from the boarding house attending as midwife. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Isaac feared he would lose Teresa. But she was strong, stronger than he had ever given her credit for. And when their baby finally arrived, screaming into the world, both mother and child were healthy. They named him Tobias Isaac Marlowe, and he had his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes. Isaac held his son for the first time, with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the perfect tiny human they had created. "He is beautiful," Teresa whispered, exhausted but smiling, "just like his father." "I am not beautiful, but he is." Isaac placed Tobias carefully in Teresa's arms and watched as his son instinctively sought his mother's breast. "Thank you for him. Thank you for everything." Life changed with a baby in the cabin. The nights were sleepless, filled with crying and feeding and changing. The days were busy with the constant demands of infant care. But Isaac and Teresa adapted, working as a team to care for their son. Isaac proved surprisingly adept at soothing a crying baby, his deep voice and gentle hands calming Tobias when nothing else would work. Teresa healed slowly from the birth, and Isaac took over most of the heavy work around the cabin, as well as helping with Tobias. He carved a cradle from pine wood, decorating it with designs of mountains and animals. He made toys from scraps of wood and leather. He was, in every way, the devoted father he had promised to be. When Tobias was 3 months old, they made their first trip to town as a family. People crowded around to see the baby, offering congratulations and advice. Father Diego blessed Tobias at the small church, and Mrs. Patterson gave them a quilt she had made as a gift. Even Sheriff Bradley stopped by to meet the newest resident of the Huachuca Mountains. The years that followed were good ones. They were not easy. Mountain life was never easy, but they were good. Tobias grew into a sturdy boy, with his mother's curiosity and his father's quiet strength. He learned to walk in the meadow behind the cabin, chasing butterflies and falling in the grass. He learned to talk in a mix of English and Spanish, calling for Papa and Mama with equal ease. When Tobias was 2, Teresa became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter arrived on a cool spring morning with much less drama than her brother's birth. They named her Lucia Teresa Marlowe, and she had her father's gray eyes and her mother's round face. Isaac expanded the cabin, adding a second room for the children to share. He built bunks and a toy chest and shelves for the growing collection of books that Teresa insisted on buying every time they went to town. The cabin that had once housed a lonely mountain man now rang with laughter and children's voices. Teresa continued to teach, now bringing her children with her to the schoolhouse in town. She had become an indispensable part of the community, beloved by children and parents alike. Isaac continued to hunt and trap, but he also took on work as a guide, leading hunting parties and surveyors into the mountains. The bounty hunting days were behind him. He had a family to protect now and could not risk leaving them. As the children grew, Isaac taught them everything he knew. Tobias learned to track at age 5, following deer trails through the forest with the patience of someone much older. Lucia proved to be the better shot. much to her brother's chagrin, able to hit a target at 50 yards by the time she was 7. Both children could ride, shoot, trap, and survive in the wilderness. But they could also read, write, and speak 2 languages fluently, thanks to their mother's insistence on education. In 1885, when Tobias was 6 and Lucia was 4, Daniel Morgan showed up at the cabin again, this time with a wife of his own. Her name was Sarah, and she was a practical, no-nonsense woman who had been a nurse in the army. The 2 couples became fast friends, and Daniel built his own cabin about 5 miles away, close enough to be neighborly, but far enough to maintain independence. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew and thrived. Isaac and Teresa's love deepened with each passing year, moving from the passionate intensity of new love to the steady warmth of a true partnership. They still made love regularly, still kissed goodnight every evening, still found moments to be just husband and wife rather than mama and papa. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Teresa with a gold ring to replace the leather strip he had tied around her finger a decade earlier. It was a simple band, but it represented everything they had built together. "I would marry you all over again," Teresa said, tears in her eyes as Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger. "Every time, I would choose you. Even knowing how hard it would be. The isolation, the difficult winters, the dangerous animals. Especially knowing all of that. Because I also know the joy, the love, the family we have built. I was a trapped woman working in a saloon with no hope for the future. You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for buying my freedom. Thank you for giving me everything. You gave me just as much. More, even. I was a lonely man, living half a life. You made me whole." They made love that night, with a tenderness of long familiarity. And afterwards, Teresa announced that she was pregnant again. Isaac laughed and held her close, marveling at the richness of his life. Their 3rd child was born in early spring of 1886. Another boy they named Miguel Isaac Marlowe. He was the most easygoing of their children, content to watch the world around him with calm gray eyes. With 3 children, the cabin became truly crowded. So Isaac spent that summer building a larger house a short distance from the original cabin. The new house had 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the mountains. The old cabin became Isaac's workshop and storage for his trapping gear. Sometimes, on anniversary nights, he and Teresa would sneak away to the old cabin and make love in the bed where they had spent their first night together, remembering the nervous strangers they had been and marveling at the family they had become. In 1890, Arizona became a territory edging closer to statehood, and Sierra Vista grew from a rough frontier town into a proper community with a real school building, a newspaper, and even a telegraph office. Teresa became the headmistress of the school when Miss Anderson retired, and she was beloved by every child who passed through her classroom. Isaac's reputation as a guide and tracker made him respected throughout southern Arizona. He was sometimes called upon to help search for lost travelers or to track criminals. But he never returned to bounty hunting. The violence of that life held no appeal for a man who had found peace. Their children grew into fine young people. Tobias had his father's size and strength, standing 6'3" by the time he was 16. He was quiet and thoughtful, with a gift for working with wood that led him to apprentice with a carpenter in town. Lucia was spirited and independent, determined to become a doctor despite the obstacles facing women in that profession. She left for medical school in San Francisco when she was 18, promising to return and open a practice in Sierra Vista. Miguel was the dreamer of the family, always with a book in his hand, talking about becoming a writer and recording the stories of the frontier before they disappeared. As Isaac and Teresa grew older, they did not slow down. They remained active and engaged with their community and their children. They took in a nephew from Mexico when Teresa's sister died, giving the orphaned boy a home and a family. They hosted gatherings at their house, feeding neighbors and travelers and anyone who needed a meal. In 1895, on a warm summer evening, Isaac and Teresa sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. They were both 50 years old now, their hair touched with gray, and their faces lined with the evidence of lives well lived. Their children were mostly grown, building lives of their own. The house was quiet in a way it had not been for years. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked, taking Teresa's hand. "Marrying a stranger just to escape the saloon? Never. Not for one single moment." Teresa squeezed his hand. "You gave me everything I dreamed of, and so much more. A home, a family, a purpose. Love. So much love. I was just thinking that I should be the one thanking you. You turned a lonely mountain man into someone with a reason to come home every night." "We saved each other," Teresa said, echoing the words Isaac had spoken to her on their wedding night so many years ago. "That is what love does." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned orange and pink and purple, the mountains dark silhouettes against the fading light. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The world was vast and wild, but here on this porch, Isaac and Teresa had carved out a space of peace and love that nothing could diminish. "Tell me again how you saved up all that money to buy my contract," Teresa said suddenly. "I love that story." Isaac laughed. "You have heard it 100 times. Tell me again anyway. I want to hear how the fierce mountain man hunted outlaws just so he could rescue me." So Isaac told the story again, embellishing the dangerous parts to make Teresa laugh and downplaying his own bravery the way he always did. He told her about dragging Jake Dawson up that final stretch of mountain, thinking only of seeing her again. He told her about marching into the Silver Spur with a promissory note and determination. "You were so brave," Teresa said when he finished. "Walking into that saloon to face Rake, not knowing if he would honor the contract. I would have done anything to free you. Paid any price, faced any danger. You were worth everything." Isaac lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "You still are." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, talking and remembering and planning for the future. They talked about Tobias's upcoming wedding, about Lucia's letters from medical school, about Miguel's latest story. They talked about taking a trip to Mexico to visit Teresa's sister's grave. They talked about grandchildren they hoped to meet someday. As the years continued to pass, those grandchildren did arrive. Tobias and his wife gave them 2 grandsons and a granddaughter. Lucia returned from medical school and opened a practice in Sierra Vista, eventually marrying a fellow doctor and having twin girls. Miguel moved to Santa Fe to work for a newspaper, but visited often, regaling them with stories of his adventures. Isaac and Teresa aged gracefully, growing older together in the house Isaac had built and the life they had created. They remained active, as long as they could, Isaac hunting and tracking into his 60s, Teresa teaching until her 70s. They were fixtures in Sierra Vista, the mountain man and the Mexican woman who had built a love story out of a contract and a bounty. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children threw them a party at the big house. All 3 of their children were there with their families, along with neighbors and friends from town. Daniel and Sarah Morgan came, both of them weathered and gray, but still sharp-eyed and quick-witted. Father Diego, ancient now but still presiding over the church, offered a blessing. As Isaac looked around at the gathering, at his children and grandchildren, at the friends who had become family, at the woman who had been his partner for 3 decades, He felt a profound sense of gratitude. His life could have gone so differently. He could have remained alone in the mountains, growing old in isolation. But one glimpse of a woman serving drinks in a saloon had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Teresa asked, coming to stand beside him with 2 glasses of punch. "About how lucky I am. About how one decision changed my entire life." "Which decision? To start hunting bounties?" "No. The decision to walk into the Silver Spur that first time. If I had not stopped for a drink that day, I never would have met you." Teresa smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be. Maybe. But I am glad we found each other when we did." Isaac wrapped his arm around her, marveling at how perfectly she still fit against him after all these years. "I love you, Teresa Marlowe. More every day." "And I love you, Isaac Marlowe. My hero, my husband, my home." They stood together, watching their family celebrate, and Isaac knew that this was what he had been searching for all those lonely years, not adventure or freedom or solitude, but this: connection, love, belonging. A woman who saw him not as a rough mountain man, but as a partner worthy of her trust and affection. The years that followed brought the usual mixture of joy and sorrow that comes with a long life. They lost friends to age and illness. They watched their children face challenges and overcome them. They welcomed more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren into the world. Isaac and Teresa remained devoted to each other through it all. They still held hands when they walked. They still kissed goodnight every evening. They still found reasons to laugh together. When Isaac's legs began to fail him in his late 70s, and he could no longer make the long treks into the mountains, Teresa read to him every evening from the books they both loved. When Teresa's eyesight began to fade, Isaac described the world to her in such vivid detail that she could see it through his words. In 1915, as the world lurched toward war and the old frontier gave way to modernity, Isaac and Teresa celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary quietly at home. They were both in their 80s now, slowed by age but still sharp in mind and strong in spirit. Their children had wanted to throw another party, but Isaac and Teresa preferred to spend the day alone together, remembering. They walked slowly to the old cabin where they had spent their first night together. The building was weathered now, but still sound, and Isaac had kept it maintained over the years as a shrine to their beginning. They sat on the old bed and looked around at the small space that had once held all their worldly possessions. "Do you remember how nervous I was that first night?" Teresa asked. "I had just married a man I barely knew. I had no idea if I was making the best decision of my life or the worst." "I was terrified," Isaac admitted. "I thought you would wake up and realize you had made a terrible mistake, that you would leave and go back to town. Never. I knew from that first night that I was exactly where I was supposed to be." Teresa took his weathered hand in hers, their matching gold rings glinting in the light from the window. "You kept your promises, Isaac. You kept me safe. You gave me a home and a family. You loved me with everything you had. It was easy to keep those promises. Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in memories of the decades they had shared. Then Isaac spoke again, his voice soft but clear. "I need you to know something, Teresa. I need you to know that you saved me just as much as I saved you. Maybe more. I was half dead inside when I met you, just going through the motions of living. You gave me a reason to really live. You gave me purpose and joy and love. Everything good in my life came from you. Tears rolled down Teresa's lined face. We saved each other. That is what I have always believed. We were both trapped in our own ways, and we found freedom together. Isaac pulled her close and kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then her lips, tasting salt from her tears. I would do it all again. Every struggle, every hard winter, every challenge. All of it was worth it to have this life with you. And I would sign that contract and wait in that saloon every single night if I knew you were coming to take me home. They stayed in the old cabin until sunset, talking and remembering and savoring the quiet joy of simply being together. Then they walked slowly back to the big house where their family waited, still holding hands like the young couple they had once been, carrying inside them the secret knowledge that they had lived one of the great love stories, born from bounty money and desperation and transformed into something beautiful that would outlast them both. In the years that followed, Isaac and Teresa remained inseparable. When Isaac finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 89, Teresa grieved deeply, but without regret. They had been given 39 years together, which was more than many couples ever received. She lived for 2 more years after his death, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her, spending her days in the house Isaac had built, and her evenings sitting on the porch watching the mountains where they had built their life together. When Teresa died at the age of 91, she was buried beside Isaac in the small cemetery outside Sierra Vista. Their joint headstone was simple, bearing just their names, their years, and a single line that captured the essence of their story. 2 souls who saved each other. Their children and grandchildren continued to live in and around Sierra Vista, carrying forward the legacy of love and strength that Isaac and Teresa had built. The house in the mountains remained in the family, a gathering place for reunions and celebrations. The old cabin was preserved as well, a reminder of where it all began, with a mountain man who loved a woman enough to hunt outlaws for her freedom, and a woman who was brave enough to marry a stranger and build a new life in the wilderness. And so the story of Isaac and Teresa Marlowe became legend in southern Arizona. Not the kind of legend that involved gunfights and gold strikes, but the quieter, more enduring legend of 2 people who found each other against all odds and built something lasting out of love and determination. Theirs was a story of redemption and second chances, of courage and commitment, of a love that began with a business transaction and grew into something that sustained them both through nearly 4 decades of life's joys and sorrows. In the end, that is what made their story worth telling, not the dramatic rescue or the frontier setting, but the simple, profound truth that love, real love, has the power to transform lives and create meaning out of chaos. Isaac Marlowe paid bounty money to buy Teresa Cortez's freedom from the Silver Spur Saloon. But in doing so, he freed them both from the loneliness and isolation that had defined their lives before they found each other. And that freedom, that love, that partnership, those were the things that truly mattered. More valuable than all the gold in the Arizona mountains, more enduring than the wilderness they called home, more precious than anything else either of them had ever known.